Good morning. My name is David Kearney. I'm the current chairman of the World Trade Center Board of Directors. And on behalf of the World Trade Center of New Orleans and our 1,000 corporate and individual members, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for coming out here today to join us for the Executive Speaker Series. Before we start the program, we'd like to thank our special sponsors for the series, Jones Walker, Waldemar Nelson and Company, and our supporting sponsor, Petrotech Incorporated. Thank you for your generous support, guys. We appreciate it. It's my pleasure today to introduce Mr. Jim O'Neill. Jim serves as Chief Executive Officer and President of Quanta Services. In his position, he oversees the company's operations, strategic initiatives across the electrical power, natural gas, and renewable energy industries. He joined Quanta in 1999 and most recently served as President and COO. Throughout his tenure, Jim has had responsibility for various initiatives, including the company's renewable energy strategy, commercial and industrial operations, internal audit, and merger and acquisition initiatives. Mr. O'Neill oversaw the acquisition and integration of IntraSource, the company's largest acquisition to date. Prior to joining Quanta, Jim spent 19 years with Halliburton, where he's held various positions that encompass responsibilities for its Gulf of Mexico operations, deepwater development, and health, safety, and environmental. He received a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Tulane University in 1980. After he gives his remarks, Mr. O'Neill has kindly agreed to have a Q&A session, and so if you can hold your inquiries until the end of his lecture, that would be great. And ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our final speaker in this year's Executive Speaker Series, Mr. Jim O'Neill.
Well, thank you, guys, and I appreciate being here for selfish reasons since I'm from New Orleans. And I was telling the board that I don't get back here often. In fact, I left this area in '96. I thought I would never leave New Orleans when I was growing up. And now I'm in Houston, and it's amazing how just a 6-hour ride down the interstate, I don't get back here. But I really haven't been back in 20 years, and I did get an opportunity last night to spend the night with a good friend of mine growing up and his wife, and went to a restaurant called the Milkfish on Canal and Carrollton, and it's probably had the best piece of salmon I've ever had in my life. It was fantastic, but it's just great to see the transformation in the city and what's changed and what hadn't. So I really miss it here, and so thanks for the opportunity. I'm going to share with you today my perspective on our business and the outlook for our business. I'll tell you, I think we're in the most prolific time in the history of the electric power industry as well as the oil and gas industry. And I think the actions that companies take over the next 3 to 5 years could dictate how our business goes for the next 2 to 3 decades. I think we're in that prolific time right now. I know the price of oil is down significantly, 40%. A lot of the data points in the presentation will be prior to the decline in the price of oil. I will comment throughout the presentation and happy to take any Q&A about the price of oil and the impacts on our business or the industry if I don't address it in the presentation. I'm not an economist. I'm not a geopolitical science or commodity expert, but I can share with you my perspectives from as being the largest provider of services in North America to energy infrastructure. When I talk about energy infrastructure, on the electric side, what we do is from the generating station. We don't build really power plants other than EPC solar, but from the generation station for your base load generation to the home, we build all that infrastructure. On the pipeline side, it would be from the wellhead to the home. So we build mainline pipe distribution infrastructure. So that's our space where we participate. A few comments about who we are, just to set the perspective, we were founded in 1997. We went public in February of 1998 on the New York Stock Exchange. Today, we're a Fortune 400 company. I believe we're Fortune 396. We are the largest electric T&D, transmission and distribution contractor in North America. And we have we've grown through acquisitions. We were a roll-up initially. When I joined the company in 1999, we were doing probably $150 million a year in revenue. Today, we're pushing $8 billion. We bought over 150 companies. Most of them were early in the history of the company. We probably bought 30 or 40 in the last 10 years. Most of those acquisitions have been done in the last 2 to 3 years. But we have seen significant growth through acquisition and also organic growth in our history. We've got now 25,000 employees, and we provide a full range of services. When I talk about services, we provide planning, engineering, construction, project management, maintenance. We're a big storm responder. We probably had 2,000 people here post-Katrina helping restore. We were the largest contractor on the system. We had 4,000 people respond to Hurricane Ike. We had probably 25 people respond to Hurricane Sandy. And we do as well EPC turnkey services. These are some of our platform companies. When I say we have 40 companies, those are platforms. We've done 150 acquisitions, but many of those acquisitions are subsidiaries of the platform companies that are listed on this slide. Here's our quick snapshot on our financials. At least the top line revenue, you can see our growth over the last 4 years. It's indicative of the infrastructure opportunities despite the poor economy that we've been in over the last several years. Energy infrastructure is booming, and I'll talk about why in the future slides. Our revenues in 2013 were $6.5 billion. This year, our midpoint on guidance is at $7.8 billion. I expect double-digit growth opportunities for the next several years. We've not really the opportunity for double-digit growth. I need to be careful. And here's how it breaks down. We're primarily an electric power company. About 70% of our revenues come from electric power segment. We have an oil and gas infrastructure segment, which is about 30% of our business. We do own our own fiber optic licensing business where we provide dark fiber to customers to light up, primarily in the New Jersey and Philadelphia area. But that's just a small part of what we do, and I'm not going to really talk about that unless there's any questions. So since we're in such a specialized business, I thought I would show you a few pictures of what we do. I was asked to maybe show a video, but it had this upbeat music to it and didn't think that was quite appropriate. But this is a project that we built for Southern California Edison out in California. It interconnects wind resources from the Tehachapi mountain range to the LA area. It's a 173-mile line. We built all of this infrastructure. A lot of it had to be done by helicopter work because of the environmental sensitivity of the area. It has a capacity of 4,500 megawatts, and just to give you an idea, it provides power to about 3 million homes in the Southern California Edison area. We do about 70% of all big transmission projects within North America. None of them are on low price. We clearly differentiate from our competition, and it's a great business for us, and this is why we were founded. Actually, our founder thought that because of the age of the grid, that as a privately held contractor back in 1997, that he would not have the balance sheet to bond or provide working capital for projects. As they became bigger, larger in scope and scale, our utility customers were buying one another at that time. The biggest project that he ever did as a privately held contractor was $17 million with change orders up to $30 million. And today it's not unusual for us to be on projects obviously in the $200 million range. So he got it right. He was a little bit wrong on his timing. It took about 10 years for this business to really accelerate, but it has since about 2011, and I'll talk about some of the reasons why here in a few minutes. Energized Services, we have a proprietary technology that no one else has because it's hard to get siting and permitting on adjacent right-of-ways. Many of these systems, these transmission systems, need to be upgraded in the existing corridor. So we can actually replace this infrastructure while keeping the line energized. We can replace the towers and the conductors while not taking the line out of service, which we have some proprietary robotic arm technology that takes the conductor off, does not interrupt service to the customer. We can replace the tower, cut the new wire onto the line, onto the towers, and not interrupt service. Just a few comments about our oil and gas. A few pictures here. Here's the pipeline system that we're building out of the Marcellus on the left to customers in the Pennsylvania area and to eastern markets. The project in the middle is similar from the Marcellus to Maryland. And then the picture on the right is where we're building a gas power line that's offshore into the Rockaways in New Jersey, doing an offshore to shore approach to fuel a natural gas power plant for National Grid. This is a picture of a pipeline system we're building for TransCanada outside of Houston, bringing Canadian crude into the Houston refineries. We've got about a third of the industry capacity in North America to build these mainline pipe projects, so we're the industry leader there as well. I could not leave here without talking about our offshore operations in Houma. About 18 months ago, we decided to venture into offshore. We bought a company in Houma that specializes in building and fabricating topside production facilities and doing the installation of mechanical hookups, the installation of the modules on offshore platforms, and they do the E&I work, which is the electrification and instrumentation as well. I am very confident that this business will grow to $1 billion over the next 5 to 7 years, despite the low price of oil. And at this time, we're looking at even increasing our investment and expanding our facilities here in Louisiana. So it's an exciting time for us. Primarily, the deep water market is what we're taking advantage of, but we also do work in Israel and Western Africa from this site. Okay, so let me get into electric power. The Edison Electric Institute estimates that there'll be $2 trillion spent between now and 2035 on generation, transmission, and distribution infrastructure. What I'm going to do is talk about what I think some of the key drivers are of this CapEx that's going to be going into this infrastructure. And there's really three main things: aging infrastructure, the fuel transformation that's going on in the country, as well as smart grid and demand-side innovations, and I'll talk about that together. The grid was developed over a period of time, but the majority of the T&D system, when I say T&D, I'm talking about transmission and distribution system within the country, was built post-World War II to up to the 70s. And there was very little maintenance done on the grid between then and early 2000s. And then you started having these major storm events, and you can see the outages spiked up in 08 and 12. We all know what happened during those period of times. But these superstorms have highlighted the aging grid, and that a third of the infrastructure is beyond its useful life in this country. A third of the infrastructure is approaching its useful life. So you've got 2/3 of the grid that's antiquated and needs to be replaced. Not only is it old, it was built to serve the population centers of the 50s and 60s, not the population centers of today. So you've got a compounding problem, but this is the underlying factor for any of the things I talk about today, is that you have a grid that needs to be addressed, and I think there'll have to be decades of spending in order to upgrade the grid and modernize the grid to eliminate this risk. The Department of Energy estimates that outages cost the country $125 billion a year. And to put that in perspective, that's about an outage average per customer. Outages average about 100 minutes per year, which may not sound like a lot, but in this digital age, that's not acceptable to most consumers. And reliability is a huge issue throughout the country, and regulators and consumers are voicing their displeasure about the amount of outages that we have. So the first real upgrades on the grid, it's unfortunate that we're event-driven country when it comes to upgrading the grid. Our customers need to, they're an interesting business model. They generate their revenue through rate base, and rate base needs to get approved through public utility commissions. And the utilities aren't going to voluntarily go out and do something because they're not going to get reimbursed for it. And so it takes things like the outage in New York in 2003 was the first big driver. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 incented utilities to build transmission, to upgrade transmission system after what happened in New York in 2003. Then we had Katrina and Ike. Really, we should have gotten attention there, but it's in the South, okay? So Hurricane Sandy, though, was a game changer for the country. I mean, you've got 2/3 of your population that lives in the Northeast. The storm awakened citizens and government officials to the fact that dependency on the grid is integral to modern society. And as a result of Sandy, there's been billions of dollars of storm hardening and system resiliency efforts that have been put into place, which we're benefiting from today as a company. In addition to that, the aging infrastructure. Cybersecurity has been a chatter amongst the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the White House and Congress. And then you've got somebody goes and takes pot shots at the substation in Metcalfe, California in 2013. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is let's go through terroristic scenarios on what could happen to the grid, which is very vulnerable. And so Congress quickly passed a critical infrastructure protection standard in record fashion. So these are the two latest things that are driving our business: of the storm hardening efforts and trying to make the grid more resilient in case of attack. Now, the best thing to do in case of a terroristic attack is to have another route to bring power if they take a substation out. The only truly redundant system in the United States is in Texas. If my power goes out at my house, the lights might flicker. If a limb takes a line out, my lights might flicker, and they'll come right back on because power is reported from another direction. But in most areas of the country, there's one line in, and you're not going to get your power restored until that fault is corrected or fixed. So redundancy is extremely important to the grid, and I think not only do you have aging infrastructure, a system that was built to serve the population centers of the 50s and 60s, but you don't have redundancy throughout the country, and that's extremely important as well. So that's it on aging infrastructure. Let's go to fuel transformation. This is another significant driver of our business. Whenever you have new sources of generation, you've got to interconnect that new source of generation to the load center. If you're retiring a coal power plant and going to natural gas, then you've got to interconnect that new plant. If they're retrofitting a coal plant to natural gas, while that plant's down, they're probably going to upgrade the transmission system because they haven't been able to take it out of service for 40 or 50 years, and it needs to be repaired or upgraded. According to the DOE, this is an outlook that's been published by the Energy Information Administration, and you can see that because of the convergence of environmental and market economics, you're going to have over 50 gigawatts of power plants retired over the next several years. I think that number is probably closer to 90. To put that, plant retirements have created billions of dollars in transmission investment to date, and it's expected that we'll spend billions more over the next several years upgrading the transmission infrastructure to accommodate this shift in fuel. To place that amount of plant retirements in perspective, 90 gigawatts, there's 1,000 gigawatts of generation in the entire country today. So that's about 10% of generation that's going to be shifted to natural gas. I think both of these values, will increase throughout the middle of the 21st century, according to EIA. And the base case is that gas will exceed coal by 2035, but I think that crossover point's likely to be probably in the middle of next decade, that quick, because of all the environmental regulation. We're never going to get out. Everybody thinks, well, coal's going away. Coal's never going to go away, okay? But it's going to drop 10 to 15 percentage points as far as its market share in generation. And so here's another view. The slide on the left really gives you some of the analysts' expectations on how many plants are going to be retired. If you look on the right, you can see those dots are where coal plant retirements have been announced, and you see a lot of it is in the east of the Mississippi. One of the primary reasons for that is because the Appalachia coal is a lot dirtier than the Powder River Basin coal or the Illinois coal that's used in the West. And so most of the targeted plants that are being retired, first off, they're older plants on the eastern seaboard, and secondly, the coal, they're really targeting the Appalachian coal, which is really the dirtiest coal out there today. So why are we confident that we can go to gas now from coal? You know, before we said coal, we need coal. We don't have enough fuel diversity to get off of coal. Well, these unconventional shales is a game changer for this country, okay? And when you look at the Marcellus alone, where we have 90% of our gathering work that we do is in the Marcellus, really your traditional sources of natural gas, which typically was from Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, the Rocky Mountain area, and the Gulf of Mexico, is really shifted, and Canada is shifting. And you've got a whole entire new source of fossil fuels with these shales, where there's literally no infrastructure in place to take away those hydrocarbons and bring them to market. But if you look at the Marcellus projections, in the graph on the left shows about a year ago, the blue bar, what the projections were, and then a year later, what the projections are of natural gas production from these shales. You can see how the increase in the Marcellus, which is on the right bar. Today, the Marcellus provides 16% of the gas that fuels power plants east of the Mississippi River, and by 2020, they could provide as much as 40% of gas-fired generation will be fueled from the Marcellus, and that's huge. We're talking about production growing from 1.9 trillion cubic foot in 2012 to over 5 trillion cubic foot of natural gas production per year from 2022 to 2025. So that's a significant increase. Now, to put this in perspective, 5 years ago, the United States had about 30 years of supply of natural gas in proven reserves at today's usage, 30 years. Today, because of the shales, we have over 100 years of natural gas supply at today's usage. And we'll probably be a net exporter of natural gas during this time frame. So all these LNG facilities that are getting permitted. So it's a game changer for the U.S., and it's significant. Of course, the abundance of natural gas has also reduced the price. So, and that has a lot of positive impacts obviously consumer rates should go down. It really makes it more difficult for coal to survive. Not only is it not environmentally friendly, but now it's, natural gas is cost parity with coal or even cheaper. And if you try to retrofit all these coal plants to handle the emissions, it doesn't become price competitive. So in nuclear is just dead for other reasons, which is a shame because it's the cleaning and most cost-effective fuel. But there's so much sentiment against nuclear. I don't see any nuclear being built in this country, at least in my lifetime. So But the economics for natural gas are very favorable right now, and that's going to be your predominant fossil fuel going forward. Natural gas, power plant generation, the number one consumer of natural gas in this country will be power plant generation. What's interesting is you have no pipeline infrastructure in place to fuel the plants. So you got all the environmentalists say we got to retire these coal-fired plants and go to natural gas, but you can't get the pipeline sited and permitted to fuel the plants. AEP was supposed to take 5 gigawatts of coal-fired plants out of service last year. Thank goodness they didn't. When the polar vortex came down, they had to use that power because they couldn't get the lines built, pipelines, which it takes almost a decade or more to get these lines permitted. You've got the most populated area in the country that hasn't seen new infrastructure for 50 or 60 years, and you need to build these big natural gas pipelines to move product from the Marcellus to these plants. And it's just very difficult to get built. So that's going to be an interesting scenario as that unfolds. The EPA doesn't care, which is ridiculous. They'll sit there and say, you got to comply with the MATS rules and take these plants out of service. Well, what about we can't get the pipelines built? Well, it's not my problem. We got to take the plants out of service. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic going forward. Renewables, you do have a surge in renewables. Solar is growing at 7% per year, is expected to grow at 7% per year through 2035. Over the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of utility scale solar, and now we're seeing a lot of distributed solar in areas of the country. And I'll show you some slides on that in a little bit. Wind is growing at about 3% per year. There's 34 states that have mandatory renewable standards in place. And again, that creates transmission opportunities as well. You know, most of your wind is in the center of the U.S., from the Dakotas down through Texas, in very remote areas. That's where your richest wind resources are. And you've got to interconnect that wind energy to load centers throughout the country. So that's more transmission that needs to be built. Even with this, renewables, non-hydro renewables through 2035 will only be 20% or 25% of overall generation by the middle of the century. And I don't see it making the biggest impact. But your growth areas are going to be renewables and natural gas. From a power plant standpoint. Another big legislation that we haven't really seen the impact yet, but we believe we will over the next several years, is FERC Order 1000. And what FERC Order 1000 is doing is it eliminates the right of first refusal from the regional utility companies who really have monopoly in their certain areas. So what FERC wants to do is almost build an interstate highway system, a power line, so you can move the most cost-effective power from one area to another. Imagine, the sun setting in the eastern U.S., and it's 100 degrees in California, 105 at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and you don't need the load in the east, and they need it in the west, and they can move that power across the country. Today, you don't have that. It's very regional. Power is regional, and the utilities have monopoly. So what FERC's trying to do is they're eliminating this monopoly by saying that we're going to bring in competitive players to come in and do merchant transmission. And there's proposals being placed in front of FERC, and we're seeing activity across the U.S. from New Jersey to California in this area. And FERC believes that this is the best way to address reliability, congestion, and public policy factors such as integrating renewable energy onto the grid. So this is going to be interesting to watch as well. We've seen a doubling of transmission spending over the last 4 years, and I think we'll see a doubling again with some of these projects, because you're looking at some very large DC 500 kV type lines. That'll be the biggest transmission that this country's ever seen. That'll need to be built to move this power across regions. So that's another interesting area that we're watching closely. This is an area that can be very complicated to try to summarize on one slide. If you talk to every utility in the country that has a smart grid initiative, their strategy and their goals are completely different across each utility. But I would tell you that probably the biggest transformation we'll see over the next 5 years in our industry is going to be at the distribution level as we move from an analog to a digital world. There's several reasons for smart grids. For one, it allows the utility to better manage peak energy generation, better manage the diversity of the portfolio. I mean, the wind isn't always blowing and the sun isn't always shining, and integrating renewables onto a grid makes it very complicated. You have a lot of intermittency. That system always needs to be charged. In a very simple form, it's like a water hose. Electricity kind of runs like water. And when you turn that hose off, if you start it back up and it's empty, it takes a while to charge back up. So you can't you've got to have base load power that's charging the system to account for intermittency. And in the system, the T&D system has just become more complex. If you look at these dots, these are phaser measurement units that have been installed throughout the U.S., which basically help with voltage control. And very simply put, these are areas where you're seeing a lot of renewable and distributed generation. The Northeast U.S., New Jersey, the Carolinas, California. A lot of those folks are trying to go off the grid, which I don't think will ever happen. You'll always need baseload power, but they've got, California I think has 40% now. They're trying to do 40% of their generation needs to be from renewables. So it just makes the systems a lot more complicated, and you need more control. So you can that kind of gives you a flavor for where all of this technology is being rolled out. It also helps reduce O&M costs. I mean, in Houston, they've eliminated meter readers. So you think about, you don't hear a lot about this, but you think about not having that workforce and not having those vehicles on the road. They do everything automated because it's a two-way system. I think it's going to get down to consumers having choices too. In some areas, time of use pricing. You're going to be able to set when your washing machine goes off at 2 in the morning versus 2 in the afternoon, and you'll get a discounted price because you're washing clothes on off-peak hours. Okay? I think one of the issues today is that electricity is thought of as a commodity, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But one of the challenges in the industry, and I get this question asked of me all the time, is, well, why do you think your business is going to sustain? Because, electricity is not expected to grow very much over the next 35 years. For one thing, it's apples and oranges, because you've got an aging infrastructure that needs to get upgraded. I don't care how much electricity is being used or how much growth there is. It's a problem that needs to get addressed. It's a serious problem. And it's a matter of national security, in my opinion. It has nothing to do with load growth. It has to do with replacing the grid. But if I had to make this argument right here, first off, why is electricity demand going down? One is all these energy efficiency programs. This is a little bit misleading because this is base load generation from these central power plants. Okay, it's expected to grow 1% a year. What's taken away from this? Distributed generation, people going off the grid, energy efficiency programs, and the poor economy. But it's only expected to grow 1% per year. But working in the other direction, and I heard some folks talk about it today, is that electricity, because of the low price of natural gas, is going to be, you're going to have an increase in industrial manufacturing growth. You're going to have electric vehicles on the road, talking about 1 million electric vehicles. There's other areas that I think will offset this decline, and I don't think that it's going to be this bad. I think you'll see a higher growth rate than 1%. But this doesn't concern me about our business outlook, because of the amount of infrastructure that needs to be upgraded and the fuel transformation that's going on in the country. So when you look at the average power, your bill that you get every month, the average across the country is $110 per month per consumer. $70 of that goes toward generation. Okay, about $30 of that's for the distribution system, and $10 of that goes to transmission. You could arguably upgrade the whole country's transmission system. And if you had more options on where you got your power and choices, that it would pay for itself. Because that $70 would go down more than that $10 would go up. Okay? But the problem today with utilities is they're being asked to implement smart grid and energy efficiency programs, but the rate base isn't growing because of our stagnant economy, so they're not getting more customers, they're not getting more revenue, and yet all of these programs are taking money out of their pocket, and they're being asked to do this. Now, some states are subsidizing the utilities to do this, but others aren't. So that's another big area. There's a big rub in some areas of the country. I'm sorry, I should have explained that. Transmission are your higher voltage lines that takes power from the power plant to a substation typically. So you see these big lines out in the middle of nowhere. They're bringing power to a load center like New Orleans. It goes into a substation, and then your lower voltage lines that come off of there, your distribution feeds the houses and industrial. So everything in the city is distribution. But that power is coming from some base load generation somewhere, and there's a higher voltage line. They're typically the tall towers that you saw like this that are bringing that power in to a substation that brings it to a lower voltage, which is your distribution voltage. I should have explained that. I don't do these a whole lot. I usually do 99% of my presentations to analysts and investors, so you guys need to slow me down if I'm losing. Okay, I don't do this a whole lot, which I'm honored to do today, but I can get ahead of y'all. So right now there's rate fatigue in the country. You know, people don't want their power, you know, to increase rate increases. So the utilities are against that right now to put all these energy efficiency programs in place, but who's going to pay for it? It's taking money out of their pocket. So that's just one of the issues. But one of the good things is because the natural gas price is so low, their cost at $70 is going down. And so they do have a little headroom to invest in energy infrastructure in some areas. This is a huge issue, and I've talked about this earlier with some of the folks, but the aging workforce in our industry, this is such a specialized business. It takes 4 years and 7,000 hours of on-the-job training to develop a qualified lineman. It's an art more than a science. You've got to have that on-the-job training. 50% of the workers, not only in the contractor workforce, but in our customer workforce, are eligible for retirement in the next 5 to 10 years. It's a huge issue. And the kids of today, they're at home playing their Game Boys and everything. You can't get folks to go out and work in the field. So if you got any kids that need a job that can make $100,000 a year in 4 years, but they got to work out in the elements and brave the weather and not be afraid of heights, but it's a good business to be in. But it is an issue. And I did talk to Department of Energy Secretary Moniz a couple months ago. And he was talking about how do we create jobs? How do we create jobs? I said, it's not about job creation. It's about energy security. You have to have this workforce. You have to as a country. And because of all these permitting delays, we get whipsawed all the time as contractors because you don't have a consistency of work. Nobody will argue that we need to upgrade the grid and that work's going to go like this. But if it goes like this, you know, you can't keep a qualified workforce. And it's an issue, both on the electric side and on the pipeline side. Welders and pipe fitters, it takes about the same amount of time to train a qualified technician in those areas. So that's another headwind to our business. So in summary, I get over on time. Am I good? You sure? I do this all the time. In summary, the road ahead for electric segment is very bright, in my opinion. Our industry is in unprecedented times. Demand for electricity is going to increase. The fuels we use will transform both economically and environmentally. I think for the first time in our lives, the United States and all of North America will be approaching an enviable energy security position because of the unconventional shales. This is going to require significant investment in generation, transmission, and distribution throughout the country. So I think the greatest grid transformation will be made at the distribution level over the next 5 years. I think you're going to be amazed. There's technologies that haven't even been advanced yet, but in 5 years, in some areas, it's going to be a completely different life than it is today. You're going to have more choices as a consumer, and you're going to know what you're paying for, and you're going to have control over it, where today you don't. It's like going to the grocery store and buying things, and, well, I don't know what it's going to cost. That's how electricity is today. You get your bill, but you can have more choices and control over that going forward. All right, quickly to oil and gas sector. Investment's going to be significant over the next 30 years. I think 20 years. I think that number's low. I think 300 billion is low. Real quick on my perspective on this. I mean, I talked about this, but you look at the increase in production from the shales, both on the liquid side, which is a graph on the left, and the natural gas side, which we talked about on the right. It's a game changer for this country. It's a game changer. It's unfortunate that the global environment sets pricing for oil, and we got to live with that. I don't know why we couldn't predict what was going to happen with OPEC. I sit back and say, geez, I should have been able to figure this out. You knew they were going to keep the spigots open. And for the first time since the mid-1990s, we consume more oil domestically than we import. We consume 15 million barrels of oil per day as a country, and we're now consuming 8 million oils per day domestically. The shales have increased production over 1 million barrels of oil per day year over year from 12 to 13, which was the largest increase in the world. And there's a glut of oil now in the world. But you've got more strife going on in the world since the 1970s and more conflict, and a lot of this is in oil-rich countries, so who knows what's going to happen in the global environment. But stay tuned. But I will say that we're not as dependent upon Middle Eastern oil now, because of the shales. And that number, that 8 million, can go to 10, 11 million barrels per day over the next several years if they let us develop and build infrastructure. The biggest issue today is we can't get takeaway capacity built. That's the biggest issue, and I'll address that in a minute. Canadian oil sands is the same way. A significant increase in that development. People say, well, it costs a lot more to develop. We're below the cost point now. It costs $70 a barrel, $60 a barrel to produce out of Canadian oil sands, and the price of oil is low, so everything should shut down. The Canadian oil sand is a 50-year asset, so they look at it long. They're not going to look at it like a shale play that the wells, they fizzle out in 6 to 9 months and they got to punch another hole. So all of the pipeline operators have take-and-pay contracts. They're set for the next several years. Now, if the price of oil stays down, I think it's going to go lower personally. Okay, I think it gets sub 50. If it stays that way for 3-4 years, yeah, it's going to affect our business to some degree. But I would say that for the next several years, our business looks pretty good because of the long-term commitment. A lot of customers have already spent billions of dollars. Look at Keystone. They've already spent $5-6 billion trying to get that line to go. They've got firm contracts from shippers in place. They just need the line approved. And, you got other infrastructure that's the same way, that is moving forward, that does have permitting, that will get built. Rail, everybody says, well, rail's taking market share because we can't get pipeline built. 2 years ago, I had to defend rail's taking over the world. There won't be another pipeline built forever. Well, that's ridiculous. Pipeline is the most cost-effective, environmentally friendly way to move hydrocarbons. And right now, because of the low price of oil, it really is starting not to make sense economically to use rail. Plus, the farmers are mad as hell because they can't they can't move grain. The Canadian farmers are mad as hell. They export almost all of their wheat to the United States, and they can't move it because the rail cars are being used to move hydrocarbons. They're making a lot more money. The railways are making a lot more money moving hydrocarbons than they would grain. But that's an issue as well. So pipeline capacity is very limited. People say, well, we've been building a lot of pipeline the last 3 years. I think you got to build pipeline for the next several decades. I mean, it's a significant undertaking. Not only do you have aging pipeline systems, but you've got, again, configuration from new sources of hydrocarbons. In 08 and 09, if you look at the graph on the right, there was a significant time for the pipeline business. There was no capacity available, and there was $11 billion spent on mainline pipe. We're projecting those numbers to go much higher in 15. There is not enough pipeline capacity out there, construction capacity, to build the lines that are going to be necessary over the next several years. It's a great environment for us to be in as a contractor right now. The distribution pipeline infrastructure is just as old as electric, not quite as old, but it's old. You can see that 31% of pipes are older than 40 years. There's some pipes that are built in the 1800s in some of the northeastern areas. So I had a pipeline explosion in the Bronx this summer that was built in 1913. It was a cast iron pipeline. Those cast iron pipes will crack because of the sulfur content in the gas. They need to upgrade infrastructure. The Public Utility Commission in New York said, look, it's going to take till 2050 before we can get all this infrastructure upgraded. And that's just one city. There's a significant amount of work that needs to get done. Briefly on offshore, I'm long on, I mean, we're going to make investment, deep waters there. I can't tell you what the short-term dynamics of the price of oil are, but because we've got a diversified revenue stream and customer base, I'll take more risk and I'll invest in offshore right now where the opportunities are the greatest and build $1 billion business here in Louisiana, which right now we're probably doing $150 million. But I'm very confident in this business long term, and we're gonna invest heavily in the offshore market as far as supplying our customers with services from the wellhead to refineries. You've got that's a fragmented service provider base. You've got a lot of mom and pops and private companies that I just think it's an opportunity for us to come in post Macondo and provide broader solutions and a balance sheet for people like Shell and BP and so forth. It's a great opportunity for us, and we're going to take advantage of it. So in summary, oil and gas, I think it's a huge opportunity right now, and I talked about all the reasons, but this summarizes it. I know I'm running long on time. It's funny how I get back to Louisiana, I just have a conversation. But, I mean, we're in unprecedented times, and I think it's a great time for our country. It's a great time to be in this business, and I appreciate you guys letting me come here today, and I'll open it up for Q&A if we have time. Thank you.
Jim, we're right on schedule, so we...
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Questions?
You mentioned briefly high voltage direct current transmission.
Yes.
How can you expand a little bit on that? I know it's more efficient, but I understand it's going to be very costly.
It's more costly, but if you look at transmission, the amount of electric bill, I think the impacts will be, the impacts when you get the reduced price because you have more choices. I can choose from 12 power providers on the internet. I can go on the internet. Do y'all have that option here? I can go out there and I can look and I can sign up a contract and say, okay, I can sign up 2 years for this guy and he's got the best rate online to give me pricing online. Everybody should have that choice. Okay, and but the DC lines are more costly, but most of your lines are AC lines, and the problem with AC lines is over long distances, you got to recharge that. So again, think about a water hose. The longer the hose is, the water starts dripping out at the end. You got to recharge it to send it further. DC lines, you don't have to do that. You can send that current over long distances and not lose any power quality or voltage. You reinvert it back to AC at the substation, and that's where the cost comes in. That's where it's real costly.
And what is your perspective on offshore wind?
I don't, the environmentalists are crazy over there. Look, well, we've built lines in California and areas it's cost 5x of what it should have cost, which is unfortunate because either the taxpayers or the ratepayers are going to pay for it. But it's so inefficient because, I mean, because of all the, we've had 2 environmentalists for every 1 contractor out there. And I think on the east, it's can you get across the environmental? I mean, they should be bringing hydro in from Canada, but you can't get transmission built through New Hampshire and those other areas. And, you know, is Maine going to allow them to build wind farms offshore? I'm 50-50 on it. There's a lot of movement there. That is your richest wind resource in the country, is off that eastern seaboard. And the richest wind resource. But it will be very costly to build that. And whether it's economical or not, who knows? It's going to be very costly.
Speaking of wind, why is it when you go to California and you go through, you know, wind tower fields, and you see like 60% of them not working? Why is that?
Because the seals bust. I mean, some of that technology. I mean, it's amazing you ask that question, but it's almost like a history of the wind farms because you can see, okay, that one was put in 20 years ago. Here's a set that was put in 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. It's simply some of them are down because of maintenance issues, and it's an issue. So, but it's a problem. But I can't ask why. I mean, some areas they work well. Some areas over California, I've noticed the same thing. And what's amazing is we can't even spit on the ground when we're building a transmission line in California. But if you go out and look at those wind farms that aren't working, there's oil all over the place on the ground because the damn seal busts.
What is your perspective on cybersecurity of energy transmission? Because you get a lot of, about like things about how, you can upgrade the new technology and all of that, like there's threat, to cybersecurity and like shutting down the power lines and all that.
Well, I think it's an area of vulnerability, and I think you got to be practical about it. You're not going to eliminate terroristic threats, but you can upgrade the grid and provide a redundant system in place. Most of these critical infrastructure protection standards are being put in place at substations. Utilities need to respond with how they're going to, some are putting armed guards, some are building 20-foot fences around it, whatever. They have to come up with their own solutions. But I think the grid's vulnerable. I don't know if you can do a whole lot about it other than first upgrade it so you're not a victim of your own issues. I mean, you got to upgrade the grid first. But I think it's an issue. I think your water infrastructure is an issue. Your water supply, I mean, I don't know how you control that, really. I don't know how our customers control it. But your telecommunications, your IT security, all of that is just becoming more complex. I wouldn't really be an expert to comment on it. I would just say that your electric grid is vulnerable. A lot of these lines are out in the middle of nowhere, these main feeders that feed these big cities. And there's not a whole lot of people out there. You can go out fishing around some of these main transmission lines that feed the whole city of New Orleans. And there's nobody out there. That one line feeds the city, or half the city, so it's vulnerable. Yes, sir. At the back, Billy.
I think John had his hand up earlier.
Well, John's. I don't want to. I know what John's going to ask. So I'm not going.
Is the XL pipeline really a symbolic issue, or does it really have an impact on the energy structure?
I think it did have an impact. I think there's so many lines out there, it's just another pipeline. So I think it's more symbolic right now. It's a political football. There's other lines that are permitted because they've got that border crossing. It's all about 12 inches or however big the border is, and getting State Department approval to move a new pipeline across. But you're going to need it. I mean, it's amazing. Canada's our closest ally. They're right next door. They've got the largest reserves in the world other than Saudi Arabia. And we're importing a million barrels a day of oil from Venezuela, which is just as dirty a crude, but we're not allowing the Canadian oil to come in. Doesn't make sense to me. But they're gonna move it somewhere. It's funny because the product's coming in anyway. I mean, Enbridge is moving product in. I mean, go watch the Enbridge CEO. He was on Kramer last week. and he's producing oil. The Flanagan South Pipeline's been built, and you've got millions of barrels of Canadian oil coming in right now, either through rail or through other pipeline systems, and it's just really a political football. It's unfortunate. Yes, sir, Billy.
Billy, is Quanta the dominant company in your
Billy, I can't use that word. We do not have any competitors, in my opinion. Our pure play competitors are very regional in scope. They don't have the balance sheet. They don't have the workforce. They don't have the diversity. And we're thought more of like an E&C company, like Fluor, Bechtel, URS, but they don't have the workforce. So we're very misunderstood by the investor base because we stand alone and really don't have any competition, in my opinion.
Do you have to be worried about the feds on that at all? That was another thought.
No, well, we're in such a fragmented market. You know, I would say that even with our transmission portfolio, we only have 15% of that entire market. A lot of it's done in mom and pops regionally, the smaller voltage lines. Utilities do a lot of the work themselves. In some areas, they don't use contractors at all. So we don't really have problems when we do acquisitions. We're buying acquisitions that really are, many of them, most of them are below Hart-Scott-Rodino review, which I think is $75 million. And below, we don't even have to go to the Justice Department. On the bigger ones, we've not had an issue, and we're going to continue to be very aggressive on acquisitions. We don't buy companies that are for sale. We go find companies that don't want to sell now. I mean, the industry's been pretty well picked through as far as sellers.
And you mentioned mom and pop many times in your presentation.
Yes, sir.
I'm in logistics and freight forwarding, customs brokerage. My big competitors are the UPSs, the Federal Express, and the line companies. You wouldn't really know. But I'm a mom and pop, and I find myself being able to be very competitive. How about the mom and pop that you refer to so often? Can they hang in there?
I think small businesses will hang in there. When you're specialized, I think they will hang in there, and they'll do quite well. I think your bigger companies are going to get bigger. I think your middle companies are the ones that are getting squeezed out. Your $100 to $200 million a year. But I think if you're small and you've got a value proposition, that you've got customers that depend upon you, I envy the position you're in. And when I say mom and pops, I don't mean to be derogatory if I am either. That's just we buy mom and pops. We buy third generation companies that are successful. The reason they sell is they don't have the balance sheet to keep up with the business. And that's a heck of a way to lose your business to a competitor, is when you can't bond or provide working capital on jobs. So they partner with us. And we let the former owners, they have to stay on and run the business. And that's what's different about us. We say, it's still your company, you don't own it. But it's still your company.
That's a good feeling, actually.
And they take chips off the table. And that we do have, it's more challenging being an $8 billion company having that model, but it works very well for us. Yes.
Just what I like, this is there was an article in Wall Street Journal about, I would say about 2.5 weeks ago, where Germany announced they're going to build this huge energy super highway that's going to be over €1 trillion investment, into building the bridge to go all the way from Baltic, down to the whole country and then spread to Europe, growing renewable energy stuff. Is your company, is Quanta's, because I haven't seen much, about any global footprint, how you guys participate in, global?
Yeah, I think we'll take advantage of some of those opportunities in Europe. They've recently deregulated over the last several years, so it's open for competition and projects like Germany wants to build. It's a very competitive market. We make the highest margins in the industry. We expect to make between 9 and 10% operating income at the corporate level. Those margins over there right now are running 2-3%. So it's not really attractive for the risk. We are in Australia, got a big play there. We're expanding there. Offshore in Australia were our big new strategic thrust. I expect $1 billion out of both those areas in the next 5 to 7 years. We're expanding into Latin America. Canada's been a big growth engine for us. But there's so much work to do here in the U.S. About 99% of our revenue is from the U.S. right now. And I see a lot of opportunities here. And I'm not really too interested in moving too far out of countries into countries unless they've got English rule of law. It's just a higher risk environment, FCPA, threats against employees. It's just difficult. But Europe, we're watching closely. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious to know about your investment here in Louisiana. So you talked about growing your home-based business from $150 to $1 billion business. Can you talk a little more specifically about that path to growth? Is that organic? Is that acquisition growth? And is acquisition growth the kind of areas where you're looking to grow and the type of business that you're looking for?
I think any acquisition you make has to have a 1 + 1 = 3 dynamic. So we're going to be very aggressive on acquisitions where there's synergies to what we do today. I mean, everything I think about, I try to keep it simplistic. How do we broaden our value proposition to our customers? So, there may be an attractive acquisition that helps us provide a fulsome solution, but with that should come double-digit organic growth as well. I just see that from the wellhead to the production facilities to the aging pipeline system in the Gulf of Mexico. There's just a lot of opportunity for us to pull together a total solution, engineering, procurement, construction, take over more of that function for the customer where they're having to provide a lot of that themselves, and bring them more certainty around pricing, safety, quality, which I think is, complying with BSEE standards. I think it's a more complex world, and I think customers perceive that there's a lot of risk with contractors in our space, not so much downhole with Schlumberger and Halliburton, but when you get from the wellhead to the beach, you don't have a lot of options. So, and a lot of the companies that are in that space today aren't doing so well, which is the exciting part about it. It's a challenge because I think we can make that into really something special. I know we will. I have no doubt.
Do you have a sense of the time frame for that? How quick?
5 to 7 years.
And given the fact that you see oil being sub-50.
Doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me. I mean, if that was the only thing that I was doing, yeah, it would bother me. But we like baking things. We're first movers. We like to be first movers. We're run by people that know the business, the second, third generation. We'll typically go in 2 to 3 years ahead of industry trends. I got beat up. Why did we buy the largest pipeline company in 2009? I got beat up. Why did we go into Canada in 2010? I'm getting beat up on why we're going into Australia. And I'm clearly getting beat up on why we're going offshore. Are you going to be another McDermott or Cal Dive? No, I'm not going to be another McDermott or Cal Dive. So it's just a fun business to be in. There's a lot of opportunity. A lot of it is following our customers on land who want us to go offshore. And a lot of the work that our Houma facility does is do production systems for the shales. Okay, so it's not just, we've diversified the company in Houma too. We're doing a lot of work for BHP in the Eagle Ford and we're doing the fabrication out of Houma.
One of your slides fascinated me that offshore rig being a direct pipeline to take care of a gas electrical supply company. I thought that was very interesting. There are a number of island states that need electrical power. And are you all looking at maybe doing something like that to take those island nations?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing, we're building a big line, and if I get the question right, tell me if I don't, but I mean, we're building a big transmission line in in Newfoundland right now. That a lot of it's offshore.
Even the Caicos,
Oh, no, we're not, we've been there. Where we specialize in those areas is doing these directional drill shore to offshore approach. That's, directional drilling, it's not a business that I want to get in both feet doing directional drilling on land, but where we specialize is these shore to land approaches to where you've got a directional drill 2 or 3 miles offshore and then come up 2 to 3 miles inland through all the environmentally sensitive areas. It's a good business. And we don't do that on fixed price either. We try not to. Barry keeps me straight there. I do have two people here from the company. Bank Jalso is here. Bank, where are you? So he's probably sitting there dying to comment on a lot of the things I'm saying. He's from LSU, so I don't let him talk too much. And then Barry Bank, who's in our legal group, and she lives in New Orleans and handles our Gulf of Mexico operation. So I'm glad they're with us. Any more questions from anybody?
On the aging pipeline infrastructure, do you know, is it feasible for those lines to be relined with some composite material rather than have to dig them up and replace them?
No, I think they need to be replaced.
So it would be
The question was, can you reline existing pipes? Now, some lines are being repurposed.
yeah.
Okay, and they might have moved hydrocarbons, but now they're going to move gas. There's some lines that were going from the Gulf of Mexico north that were repurposed and now moving product from the Canadian oil sands south. So, but as far as a line that has integrity issues, I've never heard of anybody relining them. I think it's just more cost effective to replace it. And they don't replace the whole lines. They look where there's integrity issues and they replace sections of the line. They've got intelligent apparatuses called pigs that go through and they can tell the wall thickness, erosion, and it's pretty precise and talk to where you have areas of defect that need to be upgraded. Anybody else?
Jim,
Thank you, David.
we're good on time. I'd like to thank you again.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, David.
So before we depart, I'd again like to thank Jim and the good folks from Quanta. I know Barry from growing up, and it's a pleasure having you guys here. On behalf of the World Trade Center, and I speak for Dominic, who's somehow always starts his holiday before I do, but I just want to say thanks to all of our sponsors, Petrotech, Waldemar Nelson, Jones Walker, and would like to ask that any of you that enjoyed today's show would consider sponsoring next year for the 2015 Speaker Series. This is something we embarked on 2 years ago. It's been very, very successful. I think it's ironic that one of our first speakers was with AEP, and Jim almost brings it full circle to a lot of what AEP was talking about almost 2 years ago. So next year, you'll be getting the emails. There's some great speakers already lined up. In fact, the whole program's already set. So tell your marketing folks that we're looking for sponsors. It's a great way to put your name out there. And again, thanks everyone for being here. Happy holidays. And Eliza, parking validations are in the back if you need your parking validated. Eliza back there. Again, happy holidays. Thanks everybody. Have a great day.